This is Agriculture Today. I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Ahead of us today on this Thursday's program, we start with Rich Llewellyn, K-State Ag Econ Extension Assistant. He joins us to discuss year averages to aid producers in making their ARC and PLC decisions for the upcoming Farm Bill, and what to expect at the upcoming Risk and Profit Conference and Agricultural Lenders Conferences. Also ahead, K-State Wheat and Forage Specialist Romulo Lollato shares insightful information on upcoming Wheat RX programs, which will provide attendees with information on how to overcome wheat challenges with increasing both yield and quality. We end with this week's horticulture piece from K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone. He explains how to divide and replant irises to control overgrowth and increase bloom quality. That and more awaits us ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now with Rich Llewellyn. He is an Ag Econ Extension Assistant here at K-State. So thanks for joining us, Rich.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So today we're going to cover a few topics, but the first one being kind of the year averages and maybe what's to come in 2023 as well.
Yeah, we do this primarily for folks making their election on the Farm Bill each year between ARC and PLC. Also, so they can get an idea of what their payments might be coming up here in October for this current marketing year. We project this monthly for the four major Kansas crops, so wheat, corn, grain sorghum, and soybeans. And so our projections for the current marketing year, we have wheat being finalized already. It's 763, so there's no PLC payment coming up in October for that. And then for the other three crops, we're still projecting that because the final prices aren't out until the end of September. But for those, corn is looking at about 609 and grain sorghum 597, and both those prices are above the reference price, so there's no PLC payments with those. And then soybeans is projected to be 1316 per bushel, and again, that's higher than the reference price of 840. So for this current marketing year, there's no likely PLC payments for any of the crops. It's possible that there could be some ARC payments. This is for the crop that was harvested last year, but the marketing year ends in August here and announced in September. So depending on the yields, the ARC payments could happen if there was a really low county yield going on for the crops harvested last year. Then we also project, looking ahead for the next marketing year, the wheat marketing year for 2022 and 23 has already started here on June 1st. And we're projecting the wheat price for next year to be a little over $8, $8.02. That's higher than the price for the current marketing year, and that would be higher than the reference price. So there's no PLC payments going on for that, but it depends on what the yield was. Out in western Kansas in some counties, there was some pretty low yields. So the ARC payment could be a possibility for some of that, looking ahead there. For corn and grain sorghum, they're down a little bit from the current marketing year, but still pretty high. And so this is based on futures prices as well as our projections of basis as to what that might be. Soybean price also a little lower than the current marketing year, looking ahead to the next year, but it's still higher than the reference price. So we're not looking at any PLC payments for either this year or next year probably, and then ARC payments would depend entirely upon what the yield are looking like. So that's just some things on the marketing prices coming up. We also have some projections in an article on agmanager.info, which shows some of the other sources. USDA comes out with their monthly numbers, and they're showing similar prices to us. They're even a little higher on these prices than what we're showing. And then we also have from FAPRI over at the University of Missouri, and they're a little lower than what we're showing. But pretty much you can conclude these prices are going to probably remain high, and it depends somewhat on what the yields will be this fall.
Sure. And you mentioned two different types of government payments there, the potential for both of those. Can you differentiate between the two? Because one of them is crop yield dependent and the other is not.
That's correct. So the PLC is price loss coverage, and that's dependent on the price alone. We take the marketing year average price for each crop, and then if it's less than the reference price for that crop, then there would be a payment going on. But if it's greater than the reference price, which is the case for all these this year and likely for next year, then there would be no payment for the PLC. The ARC, though, is a county-based payment. It's based on county yields, and so it depends not only on the price for the marketing year, but also on what the yield was in a particular county for that year. And so the guarantee is based on an average yield. And so if there's a very low yield, the higher price could be offset by that low yield, and there could possibly be a payment. So I think as folks are looking at considering what they elect next spring, probably PLC is very unlikely to have any payments at all. ARC could possibly have a payment depending on what the yield ends up being.
Excellent. Well, you also brought up before when we were talking about what we wanted to discuss today, interest rates are a hot topic right now as well.
Well, they are, and last week we had a very significant increase in the interest rates by the Federal Reserve, another 75 basis points, which is 0.75%. So that's on top of the previous 75 basis points back in May, and there was another 25 basis points in March. So we're now up to about 2.5% on the federal funds rate, which affects other interest rates as well. So for agriculture, that means there's higher interest rates for lending, both operating costs as well as longer term loans for machinery and land. And the thing is, we may not be done. The next meeting that the Fed has will be September 20th and 21st here. And it's projected they're probably going to increase it another 0.5%, perhaps even 0.75% like they did here the last couple of times, but probably just 0.5%. But that pushes it up over 3%. And that's another addition to the lending rates. The other thing that goes on with interest rates is it's been increasing the value of the U.S. dollar. And so that has a significant impact on agricultural exports. We export a lot of grain as well as meat and livestock. And so that's a direct effect on Kansas agriculture because the higher dollar means our exports are more expensive. The greater expense there means that people probably are buying less abroad. So we could see a decline in some of our exports for that reason alone. That's in addition to some of the other political things going on with Ukraine and China and stuff. So inflation, the reason the Fed's raised these rates is to combat inflation. And we're looking at, over 9% inflation here. So it's important that we kind of bring that under control. But the inflation itself is also affecting agriculture quite a bit with the increased fuel prices, the increased fertilizer prices. That's had some direct effects. And so if we have some really good crops this fall, and if Brazil also has some good crops, we could see crop prices fall. Those input prices could remain high. Mm-hmm. So there's just a whole lot going on.
Yeah, a perfect storm for competition, especially with some of those crops in regards to competing with Brazil. So something to be cognizant of for sure. And I was quite young the last time the U.S. went through a recession, but I feel from what I understand of that time period, we're seeing kind of some common themes.
There really are, yeah. We have the high grain prices, which help, and the high livestock prices, but the high input prices kind of let the air out of that profitability and keep that from happening so much. And, a lot of instability internationally that's going on. So, yeah, it's a difficult time to navigate and be farming right now.
For sure, but hopefully with some of the events we're going to preview next, it'll cause producers to, feel a bit more stable and secure in their understanding. So let's talk about some of the things that the Ag Econ department has coming up.
Well, the one coming up right away in a couple of weeks here is our Risk and Profit Conference. We have that at the Alumni Center here in Manhattan on the K-State campus. And so we have a variety of topics. We have John Newton, who's on the Senate Ag Committee. He's the chief economist for the ranking member, and he'll be discussing some of the ag policy things that are going on here. So that'll be interesting. We do have a new farm bill that'll be coming up in another year here. And so there's been some hearings on that and just beginning the discussion about what the next farm bill will include. And then we also have grain markets and livestock markets for some general sessions, and then a whole bunch of, we have 19 breakout sessions, and some of them will be discussing some of the things we've been talking about, with grain prices, with interest rates, the macroeconomy and stuff. And so we've got a pretty good lineup here. Be glad to have folks come to that, or if they can't, we also have it available online.
And then any other events coming up that listeners should be aware of?
Well, in September, we have an agricultural lenders conference. That'll be one in Garden City and the second one here in Manhattan. And then we have that online as well with a live stream. But that will deal with some things like Kansas land values, trends that are going on. We'll have the macroeconomy and interest rate update. We have a session on succession planning. And we have someone here, Ashley Westerhold, who's just started working with some of that, and then also some cash rent estimates for Kansas, as well as the grain market outlook. So there's some things there that folks could learn from and be able to use.
Excellent. Well, some important topics for sure that I know producers will be interested in hearing more about. But Rich, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. I appreciate being on.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Rich Llewellyn. He is an Ag Econ Extension Assistant here at K-State, covering year averages, interest rates, and some upcoming events. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now with Dr. Romulo Lollato. He is an extension wheat and forage specialist here at K-State. Romulo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Samantha. Thank you for having me on air. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Been trying to track you down for a while now, but it has been so busy with wheat harvest going on and a bunch of different things. And now I finally got you in, and we're going to cover quite a few events that you guys have coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. Since you got on board here, we were busy with the wheat plot tours and then wheat harvest and then data processing. And now we're going to talk about pre-plant wheat meetings, right? And so things just move really quick within the wheat world here. And it's already August, and we have a number of extension and educational events coming up that growers can benefit from.
Absolutely, yeah. I've quickly learned is a year-round thing around here. It's not just something that you harvest and you forget about. You're quickly back to planting right after.
It is something that we think about 12 months out of the year, and we work on it probably those same 12 months out of the year as well, whenever all the planning is accounted for.
Really, we wanted to focus on a few topics here today, but the first being that there's traditionally a little bit of a give and take thought process when it comes to yield and quality, and that's what these programs are going to focus on that you're going to talk about today.
Yeah, well, I guess the reason behind these programs, right, that we're calling Wheat RX, and so it's kind of like a prescription for high yield and high quality wheat with environmental stewardship, right? And so these Wheat RX programs, they are a collaboration between Kansas State University Research and Extension and the Kansas Wheat Commission. So it's a joint effort to bring to our growers education on how to grow high yield and high quality as well. You're right on when you say that there is typically that trade-off, right, where higher yields result in lower quality. And that's true, considering that everything else is the same. Let's say that fertility is the same, variety is the same, everything else is the same, and you have greater yield, well, something needs to give, and that's usually protein, right? And so the plant will accumulate more starch in those grains, and then the protein concentration goes down, and so that's why we say usually, well, there's a trade-off, right? Now, there are a number of management things that we can do about it, from the soil's perspective to the plant perspective, that can actually help us have a higher chance of higher yield and higher quality as well. And that's really the reasoning behind these programs. But not only that, right, we don't really want to only tell growers what they could be doing to have a greater probability of yield and quality, but really how can they capitalize on that? So what are some opportunities for them to sell their grain not only based on the bushel, but also based on the protein content or milling and baking quality that the grain has. And that's why beyond just Kansas Wheat and K-State University, we're also partnering with some private folks who are bringing that information to growers. Okay, if you are able to grow high yield, high quality, these are the avenues that you can actually use to make some money out of that. And so these are very exciting programs. We're going out of the rationale of only growing bushels to growing quality bushels and help the grower make some more profit on that way.
Absolutely. And I know these dates are fast approaching, so we wanted to get you in here as soon as possible. So this first event is going to be August 9th. Tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, so August 9th is actually an event that is together with Amber Wave in Phillipsburg, Kansas. So actually it's their ribbon cutting for their protein plant in Phillipsburg, right? So right there is your takeaway already that growers should be able to get based on that protein, right? And so Amber Wave, they're actually sponsoring this program, so there's no registration fee for this first meeting. And growers in that region are going to be able to learn from us, especially as a K-State, more on the practical side on management. So Alan Fritz is going to be talking about wheat variety selection with the scope of yield and quality. Lucas Hag, the Northwest area agronomist, is going to be covering fertility considerations for high yield and high quality wheat. And I will be covering more on integrated management and some results from our last 7 years of research here in Kansas, showing how can we get to that holy grail of high yield and high quality. And Amber Wave will actually be, of course, this is their ribbon cutting event, and so they're going to be explaining how things are going to work from a grower perspective and how they can capitalize on bringing some protein to that plant.
Excellent. Well, you mentioned you're going to be covering integrated management there. So what really does that include?
Well, it really includes a range of practices that growers, they actually get to choose each one of those individual practices, right? From the moment they're making a variety selection, they are impacting their final bottom line already, right? Not only based on the different prices that they pay for seed, but I'm more thinking about the different yield potential that these varieties have, as well as the capacity that they have to produce high quality protein. But not only that, are they actually buying good quality certified seed, or if they're keeping their own seed, are they actually cleaning and treating that seed to make sure that they have good chances of a good stand establishment? And so we have research done in each one of these aspects. Then we go towards population management. How many plants should we be putting out there to maximize our yields? Planting dates. When do we need to be planting in each part of the state to ensure that we are at the optimal potential level, right? Fertility management from the aspects not only of nitrogen fertilizer, nitrogen amount, and nitrogen timing, but also other less talked about nutrients like sulfur, for example. So I'll touch on those as well. That interaction of wheat yield determination and wheat protein and test weights with fodder fungicides. So we're going to talk about that interaction of wheat variety selection with the response to fodder fungicide under high management and low management conditions as well. So as you can see, it's really, when we call integrated management, we're really talking about almost every single aspect that the grower can decide even before the growing season and how that's actually impacting their yield and their quality. So those are some of the things that, at least within my own talk, I intend to cover in that Phillipsburg talk on the 9th, and also on the Garden City one on the 10th later on that we can talk about here in a little bit.
Absolutely. And you mentioned variety there and that's such an important theme, especially right now as growers are thinking about what varieties they are going to be planting. And luckily enough, later next week, I'll actually have a segment on the variety trials that we had here at K-State. So we'll be covering that. So stay tuned for that as well. But let's get into that program on the 10th as well. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the program on the 10th, it's going to be more of our traditional Wheat RX program, similar to a couple of programs that we had last winter in February in Wichita and in Garden City, in that there's really no sponsorship for this one, so there is a registration fee. The interesting thing about this is that the registration fee is $110, which is the exact same amount as to become a member of the Kansas Association Wheat Growers. Right, so our goal is really not to get growers to pay the registration fee. It's to get growers to register and become a member of the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers, and so they will have all the other benefits that membership brings them, and they get to go in a nice meeting for free. Right there, we're actually partnering with Graincraft in terms of at least the grower understanding on how they can capitalize for that quality. Now, it's not simply purely based on a protein basis, but with Graincraft here is actually going to be more based on milling and baking attributes of that grain. So we will have E.G. Hurl from Graincraft actually talk about their program where they are already paying growers for growing high-quality wheat. We're also then going to have that variety selection that Alan Fritz is going to talk about. Now, within this variety selection, Alan usually covers what makes a variety a high-yielding variety, right, and what have been varieties that have been performing well in the region in past years. But he does an excellent job also covering and really explaining that trade-off that we were talking about. What's the trade-off between yield and protein? And how can we use variety selection in our favor to actually overcome that, right? And so he does an excellent job explaining that, and not only the pure protein amount, but the protein quality as well. Not all protein are created the same, right? So we have varieties with high protein, but perhaps low quality protein. So Alan Fritz, our wheat breeder at Kansas State University, is really going to be covering those topics in both programs, Phillipsburg on the 9th and Garden City on the 10th. I will be covering essentially a very similar talk there in terms of the intensive wheat management. Now, we will also have a fertility management for high yield and high quality. This time it's not going to be Lucas Haag who's going to cover the program. In August 10th is actually going to be, in Garden City, is actually going to be Brian Arnall from Oklahoma State University. So Brian's coming up from OSU, bringing some of their experience, years and years of research that he has had, especially on nitrogen timing of application and how that is related to wheat yield and wheat protein, but not only the nitrogen timing, but nitrogen source as well, and what are some considerations regarding if you're going late in the season, going after that protein, what are some weather considerations, what are some source considerations as well, which sources to go to perhaps decrease the potential of leaf burn and things along these lines. So Lucas will do this presentation in Phillipsburg, Brian will do this presentation in Garden City, and really our goal is to show growers how we can achieve both yield and quality, with their focus being more on the nitrogen fertility, but also covering some of the sulfur aspects, perhaps even some phosphorus and chloride aspects as well.
Absolutely. Well, excellent programs for sure that I don't think any listeners out there tuning in will want to miss out on. And if they're looking for more information, maybe about that timeline for registration, how to register, things like that, where can they find that at?
So all of that information, Samantha, is going to be at the Kansas Wheat website, right? So that's kswheat.com. If they go in there and they search for Wheat RX, they should be able to very quickly come up with the web pages for the Wheat RX, both in Phillipsburg on August 9th, Garden City on August 10th, and they should be able to register there as well. It's very important that they register beforehand so we can have a head count in terms of how many people to expect for lunch, right, which is included in the program there. And so if they can register beforehand, it really helps us with the head count.
Excellent information for sure, and as always, those links will be included in the show notes of today's program, which can be found on agtoday.net. But Romulo, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Samantha. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Romulo Lollato. He is an extension wheat and forage specialist here at K-State, covering some upcoming wheat learning opportunities for producers tuning in across the state. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. Bearded iris can be divided anytime after flowering. In the Midwest, this is often done in late July or August, so the replanted portions will have time to develop new roots and become established before freezing weather arrives. K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone, discusses how to divide and replant iris. Greg, I guess this is really the time we think about dividing iris.
Yeah, we kind of go through a rest period here for many of our perennial plants. And so if you have some iris and maybe they're not blooming as well as they have in the past, getting overcrowded, this would be an ideal time to dig those up, divide, and kind of refresh your iris bed.
So what's the process then? How are we doing this?
So they're fairly easy. They're very shallow rooted, and so it's not too hard to dig those clumps up. Usually dig the whole clump up, remove the old rhizomes, which are just kind of swollen tissue that you see there on the ground that were previously ones that produce flowers and the foliage, but are no longer necessary. So you're really the growing points are on the very ends or where the leaves are. And so you can discard all that other material and get back to where the real actual live tissue is, which is connected to those leaves that you'll see coming up and providing that food energy for the plant.
Kind of a bulb then, or kind of a T shape, a Y shape? What do we got going on here?
Yeah, that's a good question. Kind of a Y shape, I guess, is what you're looking at. So you can break off that portion that is connected to the leaf tissue and to that rhizome, that swollen area that you see. What that's doing is you're kind of moving those iris back to where you originally had them, because as they grow, they just creep out and get bigger and bigger. And so if you're running out of space that way, we have to push them back into where they were originally. And you just snap them off. You can use a knife if you need to, but most of those just kind of break off.
I'm assuming that some of these are going to be in great condition. Some are probably not going to be as well. They might be damaged. Maybe some soft rot.
Yes. So you do want a good kind of maybe sturdy or kind of a hard swollen rhizome when you replant. There are some insect or disease issues that can occur out there. And so if you have tissue that's kind of shrunken or soft rot, which would be a disease, which would, as rot things do, they smell, you would be able to tell that, but you would want the healthy portion to put back into the ground. And rhizomes of iris are right at the soil surface, if you will, so you don't really plant it or dig it deep. You just put it right there at soil level. That leaf tissue is building up that food energy, so ideally you don't need to cut that back, but sometimes they're kind of floppy or top-heavy, and occasionally we have the need to remove some of that weight and cut those leaves off a little bit so that your rhizome can get down into the ground and root back down. So you can play that by ear if you want, but we want to make sure those roots of the rhizome start to take hold in our soil before we get into the fall-winter season.
So because this is a thinning process, we want to make sure that we're not over-replanting then?
Yeah, so and you kind of mentioned the Y thing. So you kind of place them as a Y or a triangle, and they'll continue to spread out, so you bring them back to that area. You'll probably have a bunch of leftovers if you want to. You can share those with friends or put them in people's cars when they're not looking, those kind of things. But they are pretty sturdy, hardy plants. And so even if let's say you have time to dig them up but maybe not replant, they'll store okay, maybe in the garage or something like that until you are ready to plant. If you haven't done a soil test since the last time you planted, you may want to do that every 3 to 5 years to make sure there's the nutrients there for those iris to prosper. So check out with your local extension office for soil testing information. Fairly simple and affordable process to make sure that your planting bed is ready to go for your iris.
And we should see them come up again the next year then?
Yeah, you'll just kind of see them resting, and they may get a little bit of vigor here in the fall season as it cools down. They may have a little desiccation to those leaves during the winter time, a little browning on the edges, but they don't necessarily go away, the leaves themselves. And so next spring you'll see a lot of new flush growth come out of those divisions that you made, and things should be going well. Typically they'll bloom that next year, so that's why we kind of like to do it now when they're resting. You don't use up a lot of resources, and so next year you should have a pretty good iris bloom.
That's K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone, with information on dividing and replanting iris. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.